start?
Sure. I will start. I'm gonna share my screen with folks. All right, are we all seeing my PowerPoint?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Also starting my timer. We're just all gonna do kind of quick 10-minute presentations about the work that we're doing around community engagement. So I first and foremost approach community engagement as a Chicano feminist. And what this looks like for me is thinking about how our discipline as Chicano Latino studies was created. And for me, I always go back to El Plan de Santa Barbara. I got my PhD in Chicano studies from UC Santa Barbara. It was the first and at the time only place in the entire country to get a PhD in the discipline. And so we very much were rooted and grounded in El Plan. Part of what is written in El Plan is looking at how the university is not only connected, but integrally dependent and responsible to the community. So here I have a quote from El Plan that says, "At this moment, we do not come to work for the university, but to demand that the university work for our people." And I want to open up with this because I think what makes my experience different from folks in maybe traditional disciplines is that I argue ethnic studies has always been rooted in community engagement. We might call it something else. Community engagement, public engagement are the words that we're using today, but this is the foundation of our discipline. So it's not something that we just add on to our research. I won't go into all of this in any depth because of time, but I just wanted to show some kind of theoretical frameworks which ground our discipline, which frame my work. Of course, looking at intersectionality, Anzaldúa and Moraga's concept of theory in the flesh, really talking about epistemologies of the body, epistemologies of everyday life. Anzaldúa's idea of borderlands being in a very ambiguous or contradictory space, which I think we all experience as community engaged researchers at times. We have a concept called rascuachismo, which is grounded in a working class sensibility. Do with what you have. It's very much an underdog sensibility, which I think is very important for community engagement practices. And then last, we as a discipline just have general feelings and theories around self-determination, liberation, and social justice. Personally, as an artist and a scholar, I approach my work through cultural organizing. And I'm going to look at this through my teaching, my current book project, and then my work as an artist and my arts engagement work. But when I say cultural organizer, I'm talking about the intersection of art and activism. Chicanx scholars like to call this artivista. For example, Marta Gonzalez has a new book out called Chicano Artivista that looks at musicians in East LA. How they use music is not something that's just tacked onto social movements, but an integral part, a strategic tool for community organizing. In this work, it really requires intentional action. Again, the intersectional lens comes forward along with working towards some forms of social change, social justice. This type of cultural organizing believes heavily that creative work is capable of healing, transforming, and empowering, and that there are different forms of aesthetics of dissent or ways that we can evoke, reshape, reimagine our current realities. So how do I do this work as a cultural organizer? In my teaching, I teach a class called Theory in Action. This is the 5th time I've taught it this semester. And this course is a community organizing class. It's a little different from community engagement, and perhaps we can talk about it in the Q&A discussion afterwards, but this class trains community organizers through a racial justice lens. My students work with CETUL, Centro Trabajadores Unidos en Lucha, which is a worker center in South Minneapolis, a few blocks, or actually 1 block from George Floyd Square. And they've done many different things. Here are some images where they curated open mic exhibits. They organized with workers that were fighting for $15 an hour in Minneapolis before that was passed. You see images of them trying to do similar work on campus because as student workers, those policies don't necessarily occur at the same rate on the university. And then they have put together cultural nights and other fundraisers. So this is something that I do in my teaching. In terms of my scholarship, my current book project, Midwest Movidas, is looking at Latina cultural organizers in the Twin Cities. It's based on 6 years of ethnographic research, archival work, in-depth qualitative interviews. And here are some images of the women that I work with. They all are cultural organizers in their own right. They work with solidarity movements such as Black Lives Matter or Stop Line 3. They're muralists. For example, Olivia over here is part of the collective Creative After Curfew, which is a group of artists that came together after the murder of George Floyd. They're poets, they're performance artists, sculptors. So I really am interested in my book project and how they're using art, how they're using their aesthetics as a tool for organizing. In addition to my research, I'm also a performance artist, and I'm very invested in my performance engagement work and interrupting spaces. I'm also very interested in scale in terms of not only size, but also the magnitude in which we interrupt space. So I'm just gonna show you a few images of some of my work. This is an installation I put together with Pillsbury House, and all of my practices are always trying to engage with the local community. So Pillsbury House is on the corner of 35th in Chicago. At the time I was living a few blocks from here. And this installation takes traditional art forms. For example, we have the papel work, which you see in the car. They're like very, very tiny little pieces of paper that were glued on. But at the bottom down here, it was work that I did with the students that were in the after school program. And they created these tile pieces, and we talked about ideas of home. And not pictured, but to the right here, there was a place where people were able to write notes to their ancestors who had passed. This is a performance piece that I also did as part of the Naked Stages Fellowship in 2016. This work was called 141 Mednick Avenue, which was looking at issues around eminent domain told through the story of my grandfather, who was a barber for 50 years in East Los Angeles and had passed during my time on the fellowship. And so again, you can see these are stills from the performance, but it's always about bringing the community, bringing participants into the work. So they themselves are part of the production. This is another still of some work I did with Janata Petrus and Sarita Colette at St. Olaf. We also did this performance at the M, downtown St. Paul, and it was in response to an exhibition there that was looking at Mexican lynching by Ken Gonzalez Day, who's also an academic and an artist. And so this still was our response. They asked us initially if we wanted to be on a panel, and I said, I'm tired of panels, let's do something else. Is a way to be embodied in a very embodied exhibit. And so this was one more example. The last project I'll share briefly is I have a project called Luchadora, which is part of Springboard for the Arts Ready Go mobile art project. And this mobile art program invites artists from the Twin Cities and also rural Minnesota to create mobile art. There's all different types of art that people have created, from sign making to photography. I do mobile screen printing. I am not a trained printmaker, but as a trained performer, this project is really a social art practice. Once again, using art as a vehicle for engagement. And so here are some places or different ways that this project is used. Of course, community festivals. For example, this was for the Bee Festival that was in partnership with the City of Minneapolis and the University of Minnesota. We made these posters. We teach people how to screen print, and then they're able to take a print home with them. As an artist, I make all of the images as well. So I draw the flower and the bee, and I design the work. So it's site specific. In addition to community festivals, fundraising is another way that people use this arts engagement. This was a fundraiser for Springboard for the Arts at Can Wonderland, that really fun putting indoor mini golf in St. Paul. And so, right, how do we can use art to engage people for fundraising? It's also used a lot for urban planning. So this is a project that I did in partnership with Dr. Fernando Burga in the Master's Urban policy program at the Humphrey. His students were working on creating different projects for the city of Ramsey. And here you have one of my students in Chicano Latino Studies with the mayor of Ramsey, learning how to screen print. And for us, we are hired a lot by different urban planning vehicles to kind of actualize and bring people in to then talk about topics that perhaps don't naturally draw people. And then the last way we use this project is through community input sessions. And so different organizations, in this case, the city of Bloomington hired me to create some form of engagement. We're inside a fire station. You can't tell from the images, but what they wanted to do was there was different developments happening and also surveys that they wanted people to fill out. And so in order to draw people in, we were using La Luchadora to make it a little bit more interesting for people to come with their families. And we got a really good turnout that day. So I'll stop there and excited to have a discussion afterward.
Great. Thank you so much, Jessica. Why don't we go to Diane and then Emilius, and then we can open it up for questions.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much for the invitation. And Jessica, thanks for sharing your work. I really wanted to approach this more solidly in terms of dialogue. So I'm not going to present in a presentation way, but kind of give you a context for some of the things that I'm bringing in other members of the collaborative are bringing to realize an initiative on campus called Arts that's connecting different disciplinary homes on campus and through those collaborations that permeate beyond the boundaries of the university. I think one of the things that I really appreciated hearing from you, Jessica, was El Plan. I think that has guided my work coming from a background of community collaborations and working in neighborhood art centers and having a very youth focused approach to art at the intersection of science and technology, and then moving into a university setting where that permeability, it doesn't exist structurally. It's something that's constantly being developed. It's like, how do you make something that is very concrete, elastic? And then how does that elasticity become porous? So I really welcome that part of our discussion is thinking about strategies for that. And I know that in Pillsbury, there's the new space that hopefully will really be a catalyzer for that. But thinking within my experience, say within the Department of Art, which is on the West Bank of the campus, one of the kind of early ways that I tried to make connections from previous community-based work to being in an academic situation was creating a space within Regis Center for the Arts that really highlighted peer-to-peer learning. So in a lot of ways that builds on, say, Louise Mall's funds of knowledge philosophy, where you recognize that everyone has knowledge and how does that knowledge contribute to the collective construction of new knowledge. So I think that in itself is very unusual to have students really leading research and learning within a space. And then because these are undergraduate students, they became a great attractor for youth and groups like McGizzy. So McGizzy is a Native youth media production and very kind of entrepreneurial initiative. So they began to come to the East Studio to develop work. So again, how do you make that permeability? People don't just come to campus. It's much easier for us to leave campus to go to neighborhoods and get to know people and work with people, but trying to make that flow both ways in a reciprocal way, I think is the most challenging. And that also then extended to youth groups at the Science Museum who are focused on gender equity and climate justice and all of those kinds of works coming to campus. And then partnerships with artists who are based at Juxtaposition or Pillsbury House. Like, I think those personal relationships are what begin to make that flow more possible. And it's really interesting for me anyway at this point to think about how does that communication happen between neighborhoods, communities, individuals, and the university? And then how do we also activate that within the university so we are creating more space, I guess, for those collaborations. So an initiative like arts, which is art, technology, and science, is interdisciplinary, but it's centering the arts. So already it's creating a really different kind of space for how that exchange happens among disciplinary homes. And we, I think, are at a very unusual and really special, I think, moment in terms of these kinds of collaborations, because typically we would be working with a model that people often call STEM. So that is like putting an A for art in STEM, and STEM is the dominant paradigm. But now with an initiative like arts, we're centering the arts. And I think that creates a space for people to bring their whole beings into collaboration. And that became like a fundamental value and principle of the arts collaborative. So we, amongst ourselves, cross multiple disciplines and multiple colleges and are bringing into relationship existing collaborations. I think within our group, and two people amongst us in this room, the Zoom room, Colin McFadden and Sumant Gopinath, are core collaborators within the arts initiative. And Vince Diaz in American Indian Studies and Dan O'Keefe and Varachita Singh have all been involved in research that's bringing virtual reality into the process of continuing to develop knowledge and share knowledge of, in this case, navigation, that's ocean-bound navigation that can't be done easily in the state of Minnesota, where the technology of virtual reality becomes something that continues to share culture over generations and over parts of the earth itself, really. So I think I'm trying to, I hope, communicate this sort of multi-layered approach to creating a space that at its heart is intended to be a place in which people can bring their entire selves to the creative process and to benefit from the perspectives that science and technology bring into the arts and cultures, but by shifting the paradigm of the power relationship that typically exists among those disciplines. Yeah, I mean, I think those are kind of the core things. Maybe the only other thing that I would add that I think will have some, I think, hopefully influence over time is that one of the initiatives that I was involved with in the city of Minneapolis is called Creative City Making. And that was, I think, an attempt, and I say attempt because I think it stayed in that stage, to really bring artists into active collaboration with city planners around issues and concerns and questions and future imaginaries of the city. And what I found really exciting about that was being able to get to know, for me, a lot of the neighborhoods in Minneapolis. So the following year, as a freshman seminar, I introduced that idea of creative city making on campus as a way to bring students immediately to a lot of the contexts that were part of the creative city making experience, and to immediately set up a learning environment where students recognize that they were in a city, many of whom didn't grow up in the city, and began to use the city as an extended place to learn and connect their experiences at the university with. So I think there's, I guess my main question and the orientation that your invitation, Alexandra, led me to think about is this idea of reciprocity, permeability, exchange, initiation, relationship. So I think I come to this more with questions and really a desire to talk with others about these questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Diane. Emilius?
Yes. So I will, well, obviously I'm going to go next. And before I start, I just want to I was listening to what Jessica was saying, and I think back in my office, that place I used to work in a long time ago, I have a screen print that I made at a, I think it was may have been one of the first times I met Jessica at a conference or something that was in St. Paul regarding public engagement, and I think it was like Minneapolis. It's blue, if I'm not remembered. So it's sitting in my office along with my other stuff that I have. Eventually I'll see it. Again, my name is Emilius, and I began my role in the college as the director of public engagement in February 2015. And I was hired in part because of the college's roadmap that has a goal of deepening our culture of engagement. And the way that I often describe my job simply is it's my responsibility to make that happen. You know, I'm always clear that despite my title, the most of the engagement that happens in our college is being done by people like Jessica and Diane and Cheryl and other faculty and then staff. You know, my job is to help uplift what they're doing, help facilitate what they're doing, help to create kind of an institutional support within the college so that their work, you know, when I'm gone, when Dean Coleman's gone, when any of us who are here are gone, this work continues. And so my plan is to talk a little bit about some of the things we're doing in the college and then share some resources both within CLA and in the broader university, and then you know, stand for questions. I do want to say that while, you know, we're talking specifically about community engaged research, I broadly support those who are doing community engaged research, community engaged teaching, as well as outreach, because there was particularly in a college like CLA, community engagement ranges from, you know, in the School of Music, the show that the marching band did with the Super Bowl is an example of community engagement. What Jessica and Diane are doing are also examples of community engagement. And then there's lots of stuff in between. A couple of things that are on the horizon. One is an effort that I'm working on to really articulate what kind of culture we need in the college to support what we want to do with regard to public engagement. The roadmap specifically says we want to deepen the culture of engagement, but we've never really had a conversation about what that culture should be or what it is. So I'm trying to articulate that, as well as engaging in conversations with others about what's the infrastructure that we need to support what we want to do with engagement. You know, my role is part of that infrastructure. The hub, which I'll talk about a little later, will be part of that. But what else do we need to help support, again, to make it more institutionalized? Diane mentioned the Liberal Arts Engagement Hub, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit, but I think what's important there, that's will hopefully help to make us more permeable. Years ago, I served with Carl Flink in the dance department on the university's strategic planning group, and we were on a as it relates to engagement, he talked about the importance of universities being permeable and there'd be more of an open and back and forth between the institution and the community. And so the hub will hopefully help to facilitate that. One thing that I always welcome, and I will take them today as well as outside of today, any suggestions about how we can help enhance what we're doing to support public engagement and community engagement. Always looking to make things better. And so I would appreciate any guidance or suggestions. I would also say that, so I work within a larger team of institutional advancement. So those are people who are fundraisers, they're people who work with marketing and communication and alumni events, and they also can support what's going on in the community and public engagement space in terms of when they know about the projects that people are doing, for our funders, that's for our donors, that's particularly helpful, because then they can help put an idea in front of a donor who might be interested in supporting it. Folks on our communication sides, be it social media or the articles that they help to write, can promote some of the work, some of the great work that folks are doing. I'm going to put a link in the chat of it's a document that I put together that just highlights some resources both in CLA and in the broader university through the Office of Public Engagement. I won't read it and go through all of them, but I'll hit some of the highlights. So the university has an Office of Public Engagement. It's a system-wide office, and I work closely with that office. And part of my role is to help amplify what they offer. They provide great support for those who are interested in community engaged learning and using engaging the community as part of their teaching. They host a community scholars engaged scholar directory that people can opt into, so that you're listed kind of in this database of community scholars. In partnership with the actually American Indian Studies, they host a series of really interesting conversations as part of their critical community engagement roundtable. They have a newsletter that I would encourage you to sign up for. They also do workshops about promotion and tenure. So for people who are interested, for faculty who are going through promotion and tenure, or will be, to help them articulate how to integrate public engagement, community engagement as they go through that process, to help them navigate through that. They also do workshops and support about funding. They have a draft MOU or partnership MOU. They've worked with the Office of the General Counsel for those who are doing partnerships with community organizations, so they can be very helpful. Within the College of Liberal Arts, the one thing I want to be sure to highlight is the hub. The Liberal Arts Engagement Hub is going to open in the fall in Pillsbury Hall. There'll be about 2,300 square feet of space on the first floor of Pillsbury dedicated to the hub. And the intention of the hub is to facilitate public engagement in the humanities and the humanistic social sciences. Physically, it's a place where those two groups can come together, where faculty and staff and community can come together to work on projects, have meetings. We hope to host events, things like that. But it's to really help with that permeability and to be transformative. This comes from our roadmap. And this was our transformational goal of creating, it was called something else then, but essentially this physical place to support public engagement. I want to point out the opportunities to apply for hub residencies, which are basically up to $15,000 for projects that are a combination of CLA faculty or staff and a community partner. We will accept applications from CLA folks, we'll accept applications from community folks, but there has to be a partnership. We, in addition to providing the funding, we will provide space to support that project. So maybe they need a space to meet, maybe they need a space to build an exhibit for a month, or to host an exhibit. You know, everyone's different. So I would encourage you to consider, those of you who are interested in community and public engagement, to consider applying, or if you know folks who might be interested inside CLA or in the community, please encourage them to do that. Applications are due May 7th. The last thing I'll mention is, or two things. One, Dash. I know we have some folks here from Lattice. Dash is a great resource to help support faculty and students with regard to digital methodologies and technologies in research, engagement, and teaching. It's a collaboration across many departments, but Lattice is a key player. And then a shout out to some of the resources in research and development services in research and grad programs. They can help folks who are looking for grants and going through that process and writing proposals and things like that. And so that's my buzzer telling me I'm done. And so I am done. So with that, happy to take questions when as appropriate.
Thank you, Emilius. That was very helpful. Questions?
So I stuck my 2 in the chat, but I'll just go ahead and voice them. Hi, everybody. When students engage and volunteer, I had a conversation this morning with my community partner. It's a middle school, and they're very excited about the students who are coming over and supporting their teachers and learning and building these relationships between K-12 and university institutions. And I brought up the topic of compensation. When students are receiving compensation that feels real to them in exchange for the time that they're spending supporting our programs, their commitment deepens, the value raises. And I was asking the principal at the school, does he want me to begin a fundraising or a grant writing effort to find funds to compensate students? And while he was never going to say no to funds, his answer was half no, because he doesn't want to get into a grant dependent state where his program is thin 5 years from now or viewed as undervalued when it stops compensating students. Community engaged learning credit is great, and I love CEL, and I want to do more of that. And when our students get college credit for their commitments to our communities, I love it. Do people have other ideas that isn't money or college credit for supporting our students and rewarding our students' interests in supporting our community engaged efforts?
I don't have overall like blanket ideas for an entire class, but some of the things I've tried to do on an individual basis, because I think some of the students that take classes don't want the deep work, right? But those that do, I'd like to offer opportunities. So some things that I've done is work with the community organization that they've worked with to figure out, so most of my students after graduating or upon finishing almost have been hired by Setul as paid interns after they've done work where they were not paid. Some of my students who are artists are very interested in getting their work out there, but because they're emerging, they don't have access. And so my commitment to them is getting them into an exhibition or getting them performance space, things that they might not have access to because of their network still emerging or because they just don't have the capital to get studio space. So kind of making these bartering exchanges with folks that I know. So I've had a few students that are musicians, and I've gotten them studio space to download or to make their first demo, you know, as an example. And then the last thing that I try to do with my students is if there's a select few that are very dedicated and really love this work, I try to hire them on as research assistants, because one thing we see, especially for students of color and Chicano Latinx students in the humanities, is that they don't have access to research opportunities in the same way as folks do in other disciplines. And those of them that are interested in graduate school, it's very important, particularly how competitive graduate school, no matter what field they're going into, has gotten, to have those opportunities. So I try to hire them on as RAs, find other sources for them. And again, they might be getting paid, but it's more about one-on-one time with them to really teach them deeper research and deeper engagement skills that they won't get in class.
Something, not having a firm answer, but 2 opportunities, I suppose, to maybe identify best practices. One of the things that we have within CLA, and I can't remember, you may be a part of it or not, we have a Google group of people. There's like 175 people, mostly faculty, some staff, probably maybe some students, who interested in community engagement. And interest could mean a variety of things. And that could be a perfect question to throw out there and see what people are doing, you know, in their classrooms or in their work. The university has a public engagement network that cuts across the different colleges, Twin Cities campus, as well as our system campuses. And I would be happy to, you know, Cheryl, if you want to put something in writing that I can share, happy to share that with those folks, or maybe bring it up at they meet monthly. and see if other folks have examples or ideas, because I'm sure that that comes up a lot.
One of the ideas voiced by the principal today was the idea of like a community engaged fellowship, right? And as opposed to like an hourly paycheck, which just feels kind of not the point. If the university had a program, kind of like the community engaged scholars program, and maybe that's it. Maybe we don't want to tie money to it or fellowships to it, but would the university have appetite for some kind of a endowment fund that funded a small number of like tuition offsets for community engagement, or something that communicated well to students who maybe were limited financial resources, that this is a valuable use of their time. But yeah, I'll ask that question to the networks you suggest.
Well, it's almost, you know, it's interesting. The university has CLA is active in this space, an internship scholarship, and it's to make it possible for students to take internships that don't pay, which are not uncommon. And I wonder, you know, something on the community engagement public service side could be similar, so that you could do the service and not have to choose between, do I work or, and again, that creates some equities and makes it more possible for more people to take advantage of that. I think the challenge you get into is then some people say, well, it's not community service if you're getting paid. And there are some issues if about course credit, if you're getting credit for something that you're getting money for. But I'd like to believe we can figure a way to do it and thread the needle, as it were, and do it in a way that doesn't run afoul of rules.
Would those community students doing community engaged work be currently eligible for those fellowships?
Yeah, and I've had several students that have done them, and they're great. They're geared, at least the ones my students have gotten, geared towards the summer. And what's nice is that they can apply without having to know their site. Obviously, Cheryl, it sounds like in your case, you do have a site already determined, but for future projects, I think it really opens up. Also, American Studies got a large donation from someone where they're able to pilot a program. So they're doing something similar within their department. And I think they funded 5 to 8 students for a significant amount of money through this kind of paid internship. So that they might be another resource to connect with.
It's not so certain, but your question makes me think about the Europe program in general, undergraduate research opportunity program. I don't think there's ever been, and I could be completely wrong, but a discussion about what is community engaged research. What does that look like in terms of how applications are made? What's the recognition that doing that in a more collective way as a group, rather than individual students, but a cluster of students applying? Like, that seems like it could be really productive.
As always, I love this institution because A, there's so many things going on that I didn't even know about, like the internship fellowship and the American Studies pilot, and B, thinking creatively about how to use the Europe is really cool.
I can just chime in really briefly because I spent a lot of time in the career readiness space. And I think one of the things that I think about a lot in this conversation is how you just help students see that big picture and make the connections, and then, you know, really learn to articulate these experiences to employers or to graduate schools. And I think that broader conversation within the provost office is moving along. There's a lot of talk about these comprehensive learner records or co-curricular transcripts and other things that really value student experiences outside the classroom in a way that they can sort of take with them with that attestation from the institution. And it makes me really excited to sort of value the students more holistically. And so I'm hoping that that just continues to get better.
That's really cool.
Do others have questions? Cheryl, you had a second one in here.
Yeah, that one's hairier. It's just about coordinating across colleges. And Emilius and I had a short sidebar conversation. I'm not aware of something like the hub that exists in CSE. Like, I just have gotten to know Kelsey Klars, who does like undergrad engagement, but things like the Eureka, like down at the YWCA, they have this Eureka program for girls interested in science. And they, 8th and 9th grade, they spend the summer on campus, and 10th and 11th, they have internships. And now I'm moving over toward like my science world, of course, but that's all happening through CSE, but there's a lot of science that happens outside of CSE that Kelsey couldn't know about. And like all of the neuroscience and psychology happens.
Well, there's an interesting, and I'm not going to remember the name of it, collaboration between CSE and theater arts and dance, if I'm not mistaken.
And I've gotten to know Bridget Redden. Yes.
You know, and so, yeah. And you know, it's an ongoing challenge. Yeah. You know, in some ways, the network that I mentioned helps, but this is such a big and massive place, and it's just about, you know, building relationships and trying to. One thing that may help the university, we started trying to do it in CLA, and in some ways it spurred, I think, a larger conversation, so I'll take a little bit of credit for it. The university is working on something called the footprint, which is intended to kind of put on a map community public engagement initiatives and partnerships across all campuses. Right now it's Twin Cities, but the goal is to make it across the entire system. And that might make it easier to know about other programs and what people are doing if people put their initiatives and programs in there.
And then we start running into the problem that we're so huge and there's so many of us.
Yeah. And that everything doesn't always fit into the boxes that we, you know, but, you know, I will say when we were working, because we were going to collaborate with the Office of Public Engagement on the one we were doing within the college, and they were willing to change some of their categories so that it fit with, like, can you add a humanities as a type of engagement? Like that's an actual type, you know, or that's an issue, along with, you know, water and food and art and other things. And so they were willing to do that, which meant we didn't have to ask those questions because they were, and we could funnel our people into the footprint. So there are opportunities to collaborate.
Another cross-modal collaboration that occurred to me a lot while Jessica was talking was the this new Masonic Institute for the Developing Brain. Yes, I'm a neuroscientist. Yes, those are the people I hang out with. But, you know, they're remodeling that Hugh Shriners Hospital, and Anita Randolph is leading that engagement core, and she's really serious about, well, her job. And so having her as a partner is wonderful. And I was thinking there could be a very nice, like, I know nothing about what you do, Jessica, but I was just looking at the types of things you do, and I was picturing that happening in the new space over at Midby. And
yeah, I love scientists. I have been doing collaborations with folks on the St. Paul campus who do all the science things with the natural elements, the bees and the water, particularly in my work around Stop Line 3. I'm also starting a project right now with one of the researchers and midwives at the birth center here at Fairview, looking at Chicana birthwork practices and Mexican traditional medicine and how we bring that to Western sciences. So I love any type of science collaboration. And yeah, glad to meet you, Cheryl. We can keep talking.
I will make sure you meet Anita, because I think beautiful things will happen.
Yeah, that'll be great.
I'd like to ask how you have adapted your work with COVID, how that's affected, if you've found ways to work around it in terms of your work with the community. To either Diane, Jessica, both of you, or Cheryl, anyone?
So I can just answer briefly. The Luchadora project has completely stopped. One of the issues for us in COVID, particularly with the Latinx community, is that we were so hit so hard by COVID. And The same thing for a lot of the Black community that I do a lot of solidarity projects with. And I think that the current police state in which we're living in, the murders of George Floyd and most recently Dante Wright, have meant that we have to pivot. But for me, as an engaged scholar, as a Chicana feminist, it means that we're always meeting the needs of the time, because I say we as researchers, as Chicana feminists in ethnic studies, our work is always in collaboration, no matter what our specific research topic is, with the community. And so we pivot with them because we're part of it. We're that insider outsider scholar. And so new projects have emerged, trying to support the artists that I'm researching in my book who are doing new projects because of what's been happening in our city. And so that's kind of the way that I'm continuing the engagement work. And I know projects like Luchadora will be there. We're doing a project on the West Side this weekend for youth, Black, Indigenous, and Brown youth that want to have a creative outlet for what they're experiencing right now. The young 13-year-old that was murdered by Chicago police, Alex Pulido, there's a lot of anger and sadness that our youth are experiencing. So we'll bring Luchadora there. But again, I really just try to go off of what the community wants.
Mm-hmm. Diane, you're on mute.
I'm thinking about things that aren't directly the arts initiative, but have certainly informed them. So thinking about a group, Improvising Ecosystems, that right before the pandemic, we were kind of regrouping, but it's a group of artists and composers and musicians, a loose group, we shall say, and artists and musicians and composers, not only within the university, but locally as well. And typically we go to ecological research sites like Cedar Creek or Cloquet, et cetera, but those are impossible to go. So that just becomes kind of on hold a bit, other than going to the Mississippi River is our closest site. But then the other, I was thinking this last semester, I taught a course, a Grand Challenges course on art and health justice. And it was a course imagined with a collaborator, Oscar Garza, who's now in New Orleans. And so we ended up continuing to partner on that course. And what I think the pandemic helped us with in a certain way was being able to connect with more people to come into the classroom via Zoom who wouldn't have been able to do that just logistically, either because of location or very fundamental things like parking on campus, which is expensive. So that was really incredible to be able to have so many artists in particular come, but community organizers and neighborhood healthcare practitioners, et cetera. So really looking forward to teaching that in the fall, where we can be more mobile and visit people as well.
I will say, just piggybacking on that, Diane, I think when COVID ends, whenever that will be, but it will end, I think one of the things that will last will be, doing events in such a way that allow people to participate remotely. It was a challenge before COVID, and I think there was a resistance to, well, if we put it online, then people are not going to come. But when we didn't have a choice, we had to do it. And I think people are realizing that it allows more people, not just local people, but people from outside the cities, and it gives you content that you can share later. You can perhaps turn it into a podcast. You can put it online. You can, it can live on a website, and that doesn't always happen if you just have an event in person, if it's not filmed or recorded. So I think the one thing I might say has been positive to come out of COVID might be more intentional efforts to kind of spread who can take advantage of talks and lectures and presentations that are related to community engagement that we're doing, and to allow more people to participate without having to come here for a meeting and pay for parking and all of those things.
Yeah, I think my my first such collaboration was with the composer, Paulina Oliveros, who was at the time at RPI in upstate New York. And at that time, like broadband internet did not exist in like 2006. And so when that failed us, I remember one class, we actually went into like the Department of Arts conference room where there was a speakerphone and we held our collaboration via speakerphone. So it's nice to know that we have a more hardy infrastructure to support that.
That was the speakerphone, the conference phone was cutting edge technology.
Totally.
I think there is an interesting question though about sort of what the effects of our connections with the communities will be as we come out of this. I only know of one researcher. I had one researcher that I helped to get permission because her work was in rural Minnesota in a place where, she really couldn't make her connections remotely. And we did very careful and very complicated sort of write-ups to get her permission to continue her work during the pandemic. But just writing that through and thinking through her explanations, one question that I'll be interested to see is whether, this period where this has been the norm will affect who's willing and under what circumstances people are willing to connect with the university. I guess I'm just interested if others have sort of thought about that with their own work.
Can you say a little more what you mean by interested in working?
Well, so, I mean, I guess like in that specific case, one of the challenges was that her community was one that was, it's changing rapidly. And so a lot of the connections that she'd had from before, she was afraid would just simply be gone. And she'd have to sort of start over with those connections. And the people she could reach remotely would be different people than the people that she was able to connect with face to face. And I suspect that latter element isn't uncommon, right? Where it's different people who show up when you're having a Zoom call versus when you're meeting in person. And, it's not necessarily a better or worse, it's a different group. And so I'm just interested if people are thinking about that.
I think for me personally, and all of the work that I'm doing, creating new relationships since COVID has been extremely challenging. And so I have been relying on my deep relationships with community. I'm from the Midway area, so I've been born and raised here, which I think as a scholar, being able to be hired in my home city, right, home state is a huge advantage I have because I'm drawing on, decades of relationships I've built with folks. And being able to have those relationships then allowed me to access new folks via, poetry readings or things like that we're doing. But in terms of like deep, what I would consider deep engagement work, it has not been possible for me with new people. And I even teach the one-to-one community organizing where you meet with somebody new and you talk about your self-interest. They learned this in my theory and action course. And I had my students do it for the first time via Zoom. Normally they do it in person. And yeah, it was cool. You got to do a one-to-one with a student in Texas and somebody that's in North Dakota, both taking my class in Minnesota, but it wasn't the same. And maybe it's because I'm a performance artist and I really love the embodied experience of being present. But I think that it will impact everyone's research if we aren't able to come together anytime soon.
I was thinking, Jessica, for somebody like myself who didn't grow up in the area and moved well into my life to Minneapolis, I find it a very difficult place to develop those relationships. And then when I'm kind of thinking this through, then I layer on that the kind of historical injustices of research that's originated in the university and moved into communities. So I don't know from your perspective, if you consider this on like a systemic context, like what kinds of shifts do you imagine being essential for the university to really shift those fundamental perceptions?
I think it comes down to resources over and over. I have this conversation so often. I just had it yesterday with some undocumented activists, you know, and even myself, who I might be very a part of the community, but I'm still at the end of the day a PhD, and I have a ton of immense privilege. And I'm seen as someone that makes a lot of money, which I find to be hilarious. You don't get into ethnic studies for the money, but the perception by community folks is that it is. And compared to some community folks, absolutely. I have so many privileges around resources. So all of that to say, I think there is fantastic scholarship and research talking about reciprocal relationships. You've spoken to them yourself, Diane, about how we build these. But I think we're in an era where people are like, we don't really need to hear about how your hearts are with us or you're feeling all this. Like, give me resources or God. And I think that will be our greatest opportunity as folks that are connected to the university, like the hub, like Amelius has shared, and also our greatest challenge, because down to the minute engagement as scholars, are you paying your student RAs $15 an hour? In our department, we are not required to, we're not encouraged to, but I can't teach a class theory in action where we're fighting for 15 an hour and I don't pay my students that. That's a very practical example, right? So yeah, I think resources and how we are funneling those out will be a really important shift for everybody, myself included.
Thank you.
Well, it's 1 o'clock. I want to thank everyone for coming. I think this has been a great discussion, and thank you to Jessica, Diane, and Amelius, and also everyone else who's here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for putting this together, Alex.
Yeah, thank you for organizing.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, so everyone have a good weekend.
You too.
Take care.
Bye.